Hey everyone, welcome back to Build. I'm your host, Brittany Jones-Cooper, and today I'm chatting with the cast of the award-winning Amazon series, The Man in the High Castle. The show explores an alternate history where the Axis powers won World War II and the U.S. is now occupied by Nazi and Japanese leadership. The upcoming third season finds its characters grappling with their fate after the death of Hitler, exploring the concept of time travel, and interpreting the mystery behind the last remaining films. Today I'll be joined by Alexa Davalos, Rufus Sewell, Chelah Horsdal, and Issa Hackett. But first, here's a trailer for season 3 of Man in the High Castle.
I've started having these memories. Memories of other lives. Other possibilities. Other worlds.
The Nazis are purging American history.
A new America.
Year zero.
Things are getting very dangerous. There could be a war.
What the hell's going on?
Ever heard of the Man in the High Castle? The fascists can be beaten. It's in our hands.
One man come in the name of love.
This can't be true.
One man come.
It is. There are other possibilities.
One man come here to justify.
What if they find out who you are?
One man to overthrow.
We need to wake people up fast.
We're the only hope any of us had.
It's all connected to this thing. The machine the Nazis are building.
To invade and conquer parallel worlds.
You can either embrace your destiny or dodge it.
The enemies of the Reich are everywhere. Where's the Man in the High Castle?
I believe in her. Just give me something I can fight for.
Realize they took your life. They could not take your
We can end it. I know we can.
Everyone put your hands together for Issa Hackett, Alexa Davalos, Rufus Sewell, and Chelah Horsdal. Hi guys, welcome to Build. How's everyone doing today?
All right so far.
Exciting times. I've been reading a lot of blogs and stuff, and the fans are like waiting for season 3. So what does it feel for you guys to finally just be at the time where it's out in 2 days and you get the world gets to see it?
Finally, right? Finally.
Yeah, it's a relief. I mean, you know, because it was actually ready a little while ago. I understand they have their reasons for holding it back, but we're pretty curious too, actually, as we said.
We also finished shooting it almost a year ago, so for us it's kind of neat to see some of this stuff and be reminded of what we experienced last summer.
I was gonna say, do you forget what you shot because it was so long ago?
To keep reminding
Forget it at the time.
I have to keep reminding myself not to give away season 4 when we're talking about season 3, because
Yes,
now
that's
we're
the
We've
Same with
started
me.
season 4, so I'm trying to remind myself not to talk about the wrong season.
Well, then you guys are really gonna be tripped up because I'm gonna talk about season 2 for a second.
Good luck.
Just where we left off, and that Hitler is now dead, and we've prevented San Francisco from being completely decimated. And then we start seeing these tapes or these films and how they're kind of telling the future and the past. And there's a lot of things that were kind of left up in the air, including people coming back from the dead with her sister. So where do we pick up in season 3? I'll let you take this one, Issa.
Well, first I'll say maybe coming back from the dead and maybe not coming back from the dead. You're making an assumption. That will be answered.
Well, she looked like she was alive. See, this is where
she
you
was
guys get me.
alive.
Every time the
Yes.
episode
My
finishes,
son
I'm like,
alive?
I don't know
She's
what's
alive.
real. I don't know where we're at. But what can we expect from season 3?
I'm going to start.
No, I don't want to start.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Season 3. You know, it's kind of a wild ride this season because we blow the doors open on these alternate realities, and we start explaining the films and closer to my. This isn't the story of my life. We start explaining the films and understanding where they're from and why and how they affect all these characters, and predominantly, you know, for Juliana, obviously, it's opened this realm of perception that that allows her to really grasp and understand what else is possible and how many alt versions of ourselves there are and why her sister is alive. Right? Ish. And what that means, and the end of season 2, when Abinson presents her with her sister, that's the tangible, real, visceral proof that there are other possibilities. And so we really start exploring the films and the alternate realities and ultimately preventing the Nazis from breaking into other realities and creating a sort of an ultimate supremacy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, for season 3, for my character, a lot of it is living with the aftermath of what happens at the end of 2, which I can't fully give away. But it's the story for both of us about, in one way, our ascendancy in the world, the milieu that we live in. That we're rewarded in a strange way for what's happened. And I keep on climbing the ladder in the Reich, and we become more successful, more celebrated, more lionized as a family, whilst at the same time there's the opposite journey that's happening inside us and between us. So it's that interesting dynamic. It's been very interesting for us to play. But also, just like Alexa alludes to, it kind of cracks open genre-wise, which for me is very interesting. Obviously, it's really good for the kind of spectacular element of the show, and it's very intriguing. But what's more important, as far as I'm concerned, is that the way that it opens up in terms of alternate realities and possibilities is the emotional effect that has on people. And for my character, the early inklings he has that there might be some other reality in which a version of him exists where he did not have to make the choices that he made, and that different members of his family might have different outcomes, becomes incredibly emotionally, psychically powerful to him. I mean, we don't go very far into that story, but it's a very major part of it.
For those of you who maybe aren't familiar, John and Helen, your two characters, are married, and they basically have to make a sacrifice within their family to uphold the standards sort of set by the Nazi.
Not by
Well, we
choice,
don't make
though.
this.
Well,
we don't make
he-
the sacrifice.
yeah,
he
chooses to,
We
because of
have
his
raised
loyalty
a
to-
perfect young Nazi, and in a way, people say, "Oh, does your character begin to doubt?" I don't think he begins to doubt. I think the doubts have always been there, but this is the chickens coming home to roost. There's a certain horrific inevitability to it somehow. Yes, so that's about as much as I can say at this stage.
Will we see his loyalty tested, do you think?
You always see his loyalty tested. I mean, it might become a bit more obvious. I mean, I would always want it to be tested more than it ever is, but I suppose they've still got a kind of a narrative they have to, roll out very slowly. But yeah, you see he's constantly, that dynamic between the person that he has to be and the person that he would have been otherwise is always playing out in a subterranean way.
We also see their relationship tested in a different way. There are fractures that are exacerbated by the current circumstances. So having seen them very unified up until this point, for the most part on the show, I think it'll be fun for people to see what happens when things aren't as ideal for the two of them.
And Helen really has to keep that ideal picture together because that's her real role, right? And especially in this society where you don't see the progression that we got to see after the war in the U.S. She is very much the homemaker, and that's her big goal. So do we see her struggle with that role too?
Absolutely. Mostly because, and I think I'm allowed to give this away because it's been given away in some of the trailers, but because we've actually moved away from what was our comfortable home. We live in this penthouse apartment now in New York. With our ascendancy in society and in politics comes a real discomfort for her in trying to figure out who she is in this new world. And then not necessarily having the same connection and alignment with the person who has been her true north through this. So, yeah.
I immediately wanted her to like join the resistance after season
There's still time.
2. I was like, you know what? At this point, let's
You
just
never
throw
know.
it. Let's just
Yeah.
throw it all out there and just go. I'm rooting for that, by the way.
I would say, speaking of the resistance, we certainly dig in deeper with the resistance this next season. And we explore resistance in lots of different ways and forms, which I think people will feel inspired by, hopefully. Yeah. And I think we see a lot of characters sort of suffer consequences to choices that they've made. I'll just leave it there because I don't want to give anything away, but we see that with a number of different characters this season.
And for Juliana, she's constantly sort of, I love the character because I'm often conflicted. I mean, obviously we know the Nazis are bad, but at the same time, keeping Hitler alive keeps us from going into, another war. So you start kind of siding with that storyline a little bit, and you can see her sort of justifying her actions based on like her human connections sometimes. And so it's hard to know what side she's on. Is that fun to play, or where do we see that kind of go into season 3?
It's interesting that we don't know what side she's on. That's an interesting thing to hear, certainly.
You do, but she definitely plays to the Nazis as well when she needs them, right? So she sort of...
Well, I think at the end of season 2, she protects this boy who's a Nazi, secondary to being a boy. I think Juliana is someone who she really sees the good in people to a fault, and I think she sees possibility, and she knows that that every decision we make ultimately has a domino effect, and I think she's always sort of 15 steps ahead in that she knows that that's kind of the only mode of survival. Yeah, I mean, I know whose side she's on. I hope that comes across.
It does. No, I guess maybe that's on me.
You've offended her.
I phrased that wrong, but I guess what I was saying is what you were saying is that she's very emotional and she's connected to people, even if those people are on the other side.
Yes.
And sometimes that's caused conflict for her in the resistance.
Of course.
Because she does show other loyalties at times.
Yeah.
But I think that's a very human quality, and as a viewer, sometimes I feel that way too. So I love that we have a character who's walking that path. Going into season 3, are we going to see any more inclusion of the Jewish community or communities of color or the LGBT community? Those communities are sort of there in the resistance throughout, but I feel like with the time travel aspect, it sort of opens itself up to that even more.
Yes.
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 Any storylines we want to talk about? No? Yeah.
You know what? You can watch in 2 days. 2 days, right?
Wait, a couple more days.
But yes, and that was something we talked a lot about in the writers' room at the beginning of the season. We really wanted to branch out and be inclusive with our storylines.
And so this whole journey started with a novel written by your father, actually, Philip K. Dick. So you being a producer on this project now, what extra responsibility do you feel to just make sure that it sort of continues to hold the concept that your dad put forward?
Oh, that's a big one. I feel responsible mostly that the show retains the sort of core spirit of the novel. It's an anti-fascist novel. That's at its basic core. That's what it is. And my dad was very concerned about any sort of radical political movements, but particularly fascism. And so, doing this show now is interesting. We've been working on this show, or I've been working on this show now for 11 years, believe it or not, during development time and pilot and all of that. And our world's changed a good deal around us. And sometimes we see ourselves reflected in this show in certain ways, unfortunately. But carrying, again, his core belief that we must always be on guard against fascism, and that it will continue to be a threat through time is very important, and I think we're doing that well. I think beyond that, we have such an amazing core group of people, these actors and the crew, and everyone cares deeply about the show. And they're fabulous partners, so beyond that, I just really want to be a good partner for the team.
Did the election of Donald Trump change anything as far as the writing going into season 3, or was that already sort of predetermined?
I was aware that when we get asked questions like this, obviously, quite a lot. And the fact is, when we did the pilot, it was already happening. It's what was in the air. It was already happening when Issa's dad wrote it, 1962. It's always but it would definitely. I mean, because it's got so much. Exponentially so much more pronounced and vivid, the divisions and what's going on. It seems like it's happened since, but it hasn't. It was already in the air. It was already the case that when I read the pilot, it was like, well, this is very timely.
But but it's not as though we write to that.
I have to actually do the opposite sometimes when it seems
right.
too on the nose.
In fact, Eric
exactly.
Overmyer said, our showrunner for season 3 made a point of saying that in the writer's room, they were not allowed to say Donald Trump when they were pitching story in terms of relation to things that were happening currently. So they were very aware of trying not to allow their stories to be influenced by current events.
And I think you can't really, because also it's a completely different decade, right? I mean, it's sort of, you're dealing with different issues and
Well, yeah.
there's
and we're
similarities,
living
but
under
that story is so
Nazi
unique.
fascist
Yeah.
rule, so there's that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different.
So obviously you guys cover some very heavy subject matter, but what do you guys do on set to just sort of like take a deep breath and relax?
He's a total dork.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah, it's my favorite
It's
dork.
funny though that we need to kind of decompress. And one of the strange things is, people ask me what's it like wearing that uniform, and it's strange that you on the first day remember putting on the Nazi uniform, and you're aware of the historicity of it, the power, the darkness attached to it, and people walking out in the corridor, and everyone's like, Jesus, sorry, that's quite something to see that. And the next day, they're like, hey, Rufus, and then within a couple of days, you just, this is cool. Right. And after a while, you just become so inured to your surroundings. It's very telling, actually, because that's what happens to people. Our capacity to normalize is kind of what happens to us, that we just become so, these things become invisible. I'm in an office that is comprised entirely of different types of swastika, whether it's leather swastikas or concrete swastikas. It just becomes wallpaper after a while, which is very strange. You become used to things that it doesn't feel very healthy to become used to. But surprisingly enough, whenever we get our opportunities to be just deeply silly, we really are.
We have a really good time. And my dog comes to work almost every day, so that really helps me anyway.
That's actually the first thing I thought, because I was just like, man, like even after I watch the show, sometimes I'm like, you guys want to go drink or should we go hang out? This is like really heavy,
It's light fare, but
yeah. So what do you guys, and each of you can answer this, what are you guys hoping that viewers most take away from season 3 or most kind of think about and kind of sits with them?
Well, for me, for season 3, it's the same as any other, and I think it was true in 1962. It was true in the 1930s. It's true now that our capacities to narrativize our own life through the prism of this moment, that we tell our own story, and we alter our story, it's just like a memory. Every time you remember something, it's altered by the circumstances, and it's like what you call the game telephone. We call it Chinese whispers, where something just changes, and people's views of themselves and their histories change, and it's quite possible, incrementally, to rewrite your story so that you are the hero and the victim. And we can do that to the extent that in order to uphold our sense of victimhood, we can monsterize others. And it's a very easy thing it's happening all over the world at the moment. It's happening in England, that somehow this sense of, this tribal sense, it seems to be not an aberration, but something that we are, if we're not careful, designed to do. And it's just very good to keep an eye on yourself, No matter
really
if you
advice.
tell yourself, behind every bully is the self-story of a victim,
I don't know how to top that. The clothes are pretty.
People really like my clothes in season 3.
They really will.
I do think the wardrobe department does an amazing job. I find myself constantly like, could I pull that off now? I know this is in the 60s, but...
And we actually have a new costume designer who started in season 3, Catherine Adair, and she's wildly talented. Every year we've had wonderful people heading up the department, but this year we have a new costume designer whose work is sublime.
Looking forward to it. Mm-hmm. You have anything?
I got a whole lot of things. I think. Well, but, of course, again, looking through one's own prism, if you will. I think, for Juliana, it's really all about resisting what is and looking beyond that. And I think that there's something beautiful in her kind of innocent and yet completely willful and tenacious drive to not accept what is and to know that there are other ways. And especially in today's world, I think that's a rather important perspective.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, and that was the thing that the Man in the High Castle sort of credited her with, is just being somebody who was so consistently herself.
Yeah.
Which I think is really hard in these times. So I think that's really great advice. Isa?
This is going to sound strange maybe, but I hope that people leave it feeling some hope, some sense of hope. Maybe being inspired by the resistance and, again, the demonstrations of what that means in different forms. But other than enjoying themselves and enjoying the various character storylines and the action in the science fiction, which, by the way, the big idea in the science fiction comes from two unfinished chapters, or two chapters from an unfinished novel of my dad's for this book. So it's something they never completed. It never went anywhere, but it was a big idea that we utilized in this. So I hope that they just enjoy themselves, but that they also take something away from it that makes them feel somewhat hopeful.
And then just really quick, I meant to ask about the new flag. It was a swastika. Now it's, what is this?
It's a peace.
Is it a peace sign? Okay.
Kind of.
Okay.
Kind of wannabe.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure it
hope.
didn't have any other
hope.
symbolism. Awesome. All right. Now it's time to go to the audience. Do we have a couple questions?
Hi. I'm a huge fan of the show, and I just find it very thought-provoking, and it does give me hope, but at the same time it's very scary how people kind of will get used to that sort of regime. So the question I have is, when you promote the show with things like Comic-Con, where there's huge interaction with the audience, have you seen a difference in your fan base or the reaction of the audience from the first pilot to today when you look around what's going on in the world?
Well, I certainly noticed a difference. The first ever Comic-Con, when people had seen the pilot but hadn't seen the show, there was a certain, not quite accusatory, but a wary tone from a lot of the questions about had we fully taken into account the moral implications of what we were doing, and how do we feel about the idea of humanizing, et cetera, et cetera. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that, but I think those questions are asked less now because it's what we're doing is much clearer. It's in the DNA of the show now. Whereas when we first opened, people weren't quite sure whether it was a little dangerous, the line we were treading. But I think we've established the tone now.
Some of the social media following sometimes can be a little bit complicated in the comments, but Rufus has taught me how to block people, so it's really helpful.
I sometimes will tweet something just to bring them to the surface and go block, 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 block.
And then they'll send me a message and say, "Can you get Rufus to unblock me?"
Well, I'm just a normal Nazi. What is the problem? This
Not
is,
really his wife, but
literally happened.
Yep. Literally happens.
A sensitive Nazi in what country was it? It was like, I don't remember. It's Argentina.
Yeah.
Sensitive Argentine Nazi. Like, what did I do?
I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, you're playing a character. Yeah. Next question.
Hello.
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 I have a question for the actors. Of course, you've been doing this for a while now. You're in season 3, season 4. Do you still go back to the original book? Do you read, try to get back into the mood, into the atmosphere? And also, did you ever read other Philip K. Dick books? Because they're amazing.
They are completely amazing. He was absolutely prolific and one of the most productive, certainly productive authors I could even think of. Absolutely, yeah, I've read the book too many times.
She knows it better than I do, probably, at this point.
I love this book. I really do, and especially for Juliana, I think as we've continued through the seasons, we've been able to bring her sort of closer and closer and closer to the book, and yeah, I mean, I read it too often. Yeah, I'm constantly going, well, we got to bring it back. We got to bring it back to the core because it's the root of our tree, and is deeply respected, certainly.
Any other book?
Oh my God, so many. I don't even. You want to? I'm not going to rant and rave about it.
When I first got, even before I looked at the script, when I got sent the script with a little email saying the name of the character, I did a cursory Wikipedia check, and within seconds I knew that my character was not in the book.
And did you not read it?
What?
And you didn't read
I didn't read it for a while. my first instinct was, does this mean he's a kind of one-dimensional baddie that they've added for kind of mechanical purposes? So that put up my defenses. But once I read both episodes and realized that wasn't quite the case, I didn't read the book for a while and read as much as I could about Nazi history. And then finally I came back to this because I was going to feel grumpy about the fact that my character wasn't in it. Where is he? And then I came back to the book, having read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, Inside the Third Reich, et cetera, and was absolutely blown away by the book. And I had no expectations. Because sometimes it can almost be a shame to kind of pluck over a book in a vulture-like way for kind of character tidbits. If it's any good, you forget why you're reading it, and that's what happened to me. Yeah.
Cool. And one last question.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Had the TV show been set in a different decade, like the 2000s or 2010, what do you think would be some of the biggest changes in the storylines and in how the show is presented?
I think you'd have a lot more difficulty having a traditional neighborhood as we had depicted in the first couple of seasons, and sort of traditional families of women who either stay home or stay drunk all day, although that probably still exists to a degree. So that, I think, that cultural mechanism probably would be really different if it were set in a more modern time. But I don't know, where do you begin? The technology would be different. Cell phones.
Yeah, we would lose. Well, it's so interesting to see the way the world. It's a world that never existed, and as you know, there are all sorts of innovations that we don't even have now that they have. But it would be fundamentally a different show. I think.
Yeah, it would also be 50 years after the Second World War, rather, and then the evolution would have gone that much further. You'd have had your, you had your mini revolts. You'd have had so much would have already happened.
Right.
By the time you came to that story.
Not sure it would resemble the show, really.
Well, guys.
Interesting to think about.
Yeah, it is really an interesting question. I hadn't thought about that myself.
I've never thought about that. That's interesting, yeah.
And the Causies wouldn't be so fabulous.
They wouldn't.
But, with the things you guys are doing with the different realities and time, maybe in season 5 or 6 we could end up there. Who knows?
It's not time travel.
That's why, did I say time? I didn't.
Yeah, so everything is
definitely not time
parallel.
travel. Groovy
It's all
dimension.
It's like a
parallel.
different reality. Is that the best way to say it?
An alternate reality.
Alternate reality.
reality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys want to check out these alternate realities we're talking about, season 3 of The Man in the High Castle debuts on October 5th on Amazon Prime Video. Guys, please give it up for this lovely panel.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.